All right, so this is just kind of supplemental information, still required information that is part of the exam, but in order to take care of all the information for the principles of exercise training section on Monday, I wanted to cover part of it here online. So yeah, this will be part of the required materials. We just won't talk about it in class. So we're mainly going to talk about what's called the periodization model of training, and the whole point of the periodization model of training is there's two main purposes. Purpose number one is to peak at the right time, and so you can see that here. Peaking is you want peak to happen. If it's just within a day, it would be right at the time of the race, or within a single week, it might be right at the time of the race. If it's within a whole season, then you want to peak during playoffs or during the national competition or whatever the case may be. So that's number one goal of periodization, is to train yourself to where you're getting better and better and better until right at that time when you want to peak. And then the number two goal is to avoid overtraining. Okay, we're going to talk more about overtraining and what that is in class on Monday, or sorry, on Wednesday. Yeah, it's a physiological changes that occur when you're doing too much training without enough rest, and periodization is designed to avoid that and still get the most adaptations possible. So the main part that you need to understand about periodization is that we have the early preseason type of work that you see over here is just all about building a baseline level of fitness and strength. And so we have high volume and low intensity during that time period. So that would go with the preseason. So high volume, low intensity, low skill training. Okay? And then as the time goes on throughout the season, volume, just the amount of total exercise you're doing, goes down, and then intensity as well as skill training goes up. So once you get right about to the time where you want to peak, you're doing very high intensity work, but you're not doing much of it. The volume of it is low, and that's going to allow you to recover easily and be ready to compete at your prime. And so those are the main components of periodization training. And this is looking at a single race cycle, but we can also do this whole thing over the whole season as well. And so then that case would be when you hear about the teams doing 2-a-day practices, hell week of football, that's lots and lots of volume, not too much intensity. But then as the time goes on, obviously you're not doing 2 days anymore. You might have 2 or 3 practices a week where you're actually doing some decent amount of exercise in football. And then you have a couple easy practices right before the game where you're just practicing your skills, and then you're ready to go by the time the game comes. So that's the idea of periodization. And you guys can go ahead and work through this question here. Definitely be important to know the answer to this question and be able to apply what we just said to this question. So make sure you know how to do that. Okay, so one of the main principles behind prescribing exercise is called the FITT principle. And the FITT principle, FITT is an acronym, and so we have frequency, intensity, time, and type. So frequency is going to be number of days per week. Intensity is going to usually be some percentage at max. Time is how long per session, and the type is mode of exercise. Okay, so so we're going to look at this for static stretching, cardiovascular fitness, and muscular strength gains. And I'll go ahead and I'll have posted on Canvas the actual position statements from ACSM and from NSCA and a couple other organizations that show you their recommendations of how to use this FITT principle for stretching, cardiovascular fitness, and hypertrophy, which is just growth of muscle. I'll put those online, and I'll just expect you to be able to use this FITT principle and apply these concepts to that. So let's talk about a few general ideas around training, and one of those is the warm-up. And the primary reason for a warm-up is to increase temperature in the active muscle tissue and increase blood flow in that area. So when we increase temperature, we're moving towards an optimal functioning temperature of enzymes and proteins. Obviously, most enzymes are proteins. And so when we're doing that, that allows you to create energy quicker, use those muscle proteins more effectively, as well as increasing blood flow so we're ready to go and using that oxidative system. Okay, typical warm-up should be somewhere in 10 to 20 minutes, and you know you're ready when you just start to just break a sweat. When you just start heating up and you just feel some sweat on your face and your head, that's when you know you're nice and warm and ready to go. And then at that point, you want to make sure you start activity within about 15 minutes of that sweat point. Okay, cool down is obviously the other side of that. Obviously not recommended to cool down by jumping in a cold ice bath or dumping Gatorade on yourself, but the recommended way would be with light activity, so an active cool down. So you go from sprinting towards the finish of a race, you don't just immediately stop and sit down, because all those blood vessels are open. You have blood just pumping out into your extremities. You want to be able to slowly help use those muscle pumps and let your body to slowly cause some vasoconstriction and stop sending so much blood out in your extremities, but then also use the muscle pumps to pump that blood back so you don't get pooling out in your extremities. And so obviously that active cool down helps with venous return, minimizes blood pooling, which is going to help with limiting soreness. The more blood pooling we have, the more soreness we have, because you get all those inflammatory cells, those immune system cells just kind of stuck out in that space, and they cause more inflammation and more soreness. So that's the recommended cool down. Okay, and then with stretching, we'll talk about stretching a little bit. Actually, there's a lot of newer information on this now. At this point, we know that stretching can be. There's some evidence against stretching right before an activity. Okay, and so especially activities that you are required to produce a lot of power quickly. So like a weightlifting event or a sprinting event or a jumping event, you should not statically stretch right before that event. The research is pretty clear that will actually decrease your power output. And it's not just on the leg. If you stretch one leg and not the other, it's actually not just the stretched leg, it's both legs. So it's actually something happening in the central nervous system that partially controls it. So you definitely don't want to do static stretching right away. We see some decreased power production, but there's some evidence to show that if you do dynamic stretching, like maybe jogging down the field, doing high knees, butt kickers, those types of activities that stretch you, but you're moving at the same time and increasing blood flow, those don't seem to have the same effect in decreasing power output, so those might be okay. Now if you're doing a long distance event, stretching beforehand and decreasing your power output by just a little bit, probably not going to affect it too much. But for those short sprints or jumping events, those most likely could be negatively affected by that. And then obviously there's chronic effects of stretching. Increasing flexibility may decrease injury rates and musculotendinous injuries, but we just don't really have a perfectly clear answer on that. And most likely that is the case. You also don't want to be overly flexible. That could be lead to injuries as well, but in general being a little bit more flexible is probably helpful for decreasing injury, but we just don't have solid evidence on that because it's a very hard thing to test and to prove. So that's pretty much it on stretching.